The day Mabel Kingston rode into Georgetown, Colorado, the mountains echoed with a distant rumble that might have been thunder but wasn't. She knew the sound of gunfire when she heard it, having grown up with three older brothers who'd taught her to shoot almost before she could walk. What she didn't know was that the sound would lead her straight into the arms of a man who would change her life forever. The year was 1876, and the promise of silver had drawn fortune seekers to the high country in droves. Georgetown sat nestled in the Clear Creek Valley, surrounded by towering peaks and the constant promise of riches. Mabel hadn't come for silver, though. She'd come to escape. Her honey-brown hair was pinned neatly beneath a modest hat, her traveling dress dusty from the long journey. At 22, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had already weathered more than her share of storms. The small valise clutched in her gloved hand contained everything she owned in the world: a few dresses, her mother's silver hairbrush, and exactly $47.16. "Miss, can I help you with that?" The stagecoach driver reached for her bag as she stepped down onto Georgetown's Main Street. "Thank you, but I can manage." Mabel offered a polite smile. Independence wasn't a choice for her, it was survival. The town bustled around her, miners and merchants going about their business. Silver had made Georgetown prosperous, evident in the Grand Hotel at the end of the street and the well-stocked general store. Mabel stood for a moment, taking in her surroundings, wondering if she'd made the right choice in coming here. A commotion near the saloon drew her attention. A tall man with broad shoulders strode purposefully down the boardwalk, his spurs jingling with each step. The silver star pinned to his vest caught the sunlight. "Sheriff Owens," someone called out. "Trouble up at the Silver Creek mine." The sheriff paused, and Mabel caught a glimpse of his face, strong jaw shadowed with a day's growth of beard, eyes the color of a summer storm. Something in her chest tightened, a strange sensation she immediately tried to dismiss. "What kind of trouble, Morris?" The sheriff's voice was deep, carrying the natural authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Claim jumpers, they say. Shots fired." The sheriff nodded grimly. "Round up Deputy Taylor and have him meet me at the livery. I'll ride out straight away." As he turned, his gaze swept across the street and locked with Mabel's. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Then he touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement before continuing on his way. Mabel realized she'd been holding her breath. Ridiculous, she scolded herself. She had no business noticing sheriffs or any other men. Not after what she'd left behind in St. Louis. Finding the boarding house wasn't difficult. Mrs. Holloway, a plump widow with kind eyes, showed her to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Single lady like yourself, what brings you to Georgetown?" Mrs. Holloway asked, helping Mabel settle in. "I'm a teacher," Mabel replied, the lie coming easily after weeks of practice. "I heard the town was looking for one." "Indeed we are. Lost our last schoolmarm to marriage 6 months back. Town council's been desperate to find a replacement." Mrs. Holloway beamed. "You should speak with Mayor Collins tomorrow. His office is just off the main street. Can't miss it." That night, Mabel lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home. Wind whistling through the mountain passes, the occasional burst of laughter from the saloon down the street, the distant howl of a coyote. She touched the thin gold band on her finger, not a wedding ring, though she'd let people assume it was. It had been her mother's, the only piece of jewelry she'd managed to keep when her father gambled away everything else. Morning came with soft golden light filtering through the thin curtains. Mabel dressed carefully in her best dress navy blue with a modest white collar and made her way to the mayor's office. Mayor Collins was a portly man with mutton-chop sideburns and an expansive personality. He practically leapt from his chair when she explained her purpose. "A teacher. Providence has smiled upon Georgetown. When can you start?" "As soon as you wish," Mabel replied, relief flooding through her. With employment secured, she could begin building a new life, one free from the shadows that had chased her from St. Louis. "Monday next," the mayor declared. "The schoolhouse needs a good cleaning, but it's a fine building. 14 pupils at present, ages 6 to 16. Salary is $40 a month with room and board at Mrs. Holloway's included." It wasn't a fortune, but it was freedom. Mabel accepted with gratitude. As she left the mayor's office, the commotion of horses and men drew her attention. The sheriff and several deputies were riding into town, dust coating their clothes, expressions grim. Between them rode three rough-looking men, hands bound, faces showing evidence of a struggle. "Got him, Sheriff Owens," a boy shouted, running alongside the horses. "That we did, Jimmy," the sheriff replied, his eyes scanning the gathered crowd until, inexplicably, they found Mabel again. This time he did more than tip his hat, he reined in his horse directly in front of her. "Madam," he said, "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Grant Owens, Sheriff of Georgetown and the surrounding county." "Mabel Kingston," she replied, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach. "The new schoolteacher." A smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines and revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Georgetown's been needing a teacher, something fierce. Welcome to our town, Miss Kingston." "Thank you, Sheriff. Grant," he corrected. "Everyone calls me Grant." Before she could respond, one of the prisoners began shouting obscenities, requiring the sheriff's attention. He tipped his hat once more and rode on, leaving Mabel to wonder at the warmth spreading through her chest and to remind herself that men, especially charming ones, were not to be trusted. The week passed in a flurry of preparation. Mabel scrubbed the schoolhouse from top to bottom, arranged desks, and reviewed the meager collection of books. She met some of her future pupils and their parents, who welcomed her warmly into the community. On Sunday, she attended services at the small white church on the hill. Sheriff Owens Grant sat 3 pews ahead, his dark hair neatly combed, his usually weathered face freshly shaved. She found her attention wandering from Reverend Peterson's sermon to the strong line of the sheriff's shoulders. After the service, as congregants mingled in the churchyard, Grant made his way to her side. "Miss Kingston," he said, "I trust you're settling in well." "Yes, thank you. Everyone has been most welcoming. Georgetown folk are good people, rough around the edges sometimes, but good-hearted." His eyes crinkled when he smiled. "I understand you'll be starting classes tomorrow." "I will. I'm looking forward to it. Perhaps I could escort you to the schoolhouse in the morning. There's been some trouble with a bear coming into town, and I wouldn't want you walking alone." Mabel hesitated. The offer was courteous, but she'd promised herself to maintain distance from men, especially men whose mere presence made her pulse quicken. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose on your duties," she said carefully. "No imposition at all. I make regular rounds each morning." Before she could formulate another excuse, Mrs. Holloway joined them. "Sheriff, are you offering to escort our new teacher? How gallant. You must accept, Miss Kingston. A lady can't be too careful, even in Georgetown." Trapped by politeness, Mabel nodded. "Thank you, Sheriff." "That would be appreciated." The next morning, prompt at 7 o'clock, Grant appeared at Mrs. Holloway's door. He wore his usual attire: dark trousers, a blue shirt, and a worn leather vest with his sheriff's star pinned to it. A holstered Colt revolver hung at his hip. "Good morning, Miss Kingston," he said, removing his hat. "Ready for your first day?" "As ready as one can be," she replied, surprised by her own nervousness. They walked side by side down the main street, now quiet in the early morning hours. The air was crisp and clean, the mountains around them touched with the first light of dawn. "Have you always been a teacher?" Grant asked. "Since I was 18, she answered, the familiar lie coming easily. "And you, have you always been a lawman?" "No, madam." "Rode with the cavalry for a spell after the war, then tried my hand at prospecting when silver was discovered here. Wasn't much good at finding ore, but I had a knack for settling disputes and keeping the peace. The town council asked me to pin on the star 4 years back. It seems to suit you." "Most days," he agreed, "though some, like yesterday with those claim jumpers, test a man's patience." They reached the schoolhouse, a simple building with a small bell tower. Mabel paused at the steps, suddenly reluctant to end their conversation. "Will you be coming to the Founders' Day celebration this Saturday?" Grant asked. "The whole town turns out for it." "I hadn't heard about it. Dancing, food, games for the children. It's quite the event." He shifted his weight, and for the first time Mabel thought she detected a hint of uncertainty in his manner. "I'd be honored if you'd save a dance for me, Miss Kingston." The request caught her off guard. I don't dance much, Sheriff." "Grant," he reminded her gently. And everyone dances at Founders Day. It's practically a town ordinance. His smile was teasing, his eyes warm. Against her better judgment, Mabel found herself smiling back. Very well, if it's an ordinance, I suppose I must comply. One dance, Sheriff Grant. I'll hold you to that, Miss Kingston. The first week of school passed in a blur. Mabel found her pupils eager to learn, if somewhat behind in their studies. The youngest, a 6-year-old named Sarah with golden curls, attached herself to Mabel immediately. The oldest, a 16-year-old boy named Thomas, tried to present a disinterested facade but couldn't hide his enthusiasm when Mabel introduced advanced mathematics. Each morning, Grant escorted her to the schoolhouse. Each afternoon, he found reasons to pass by as classes ended. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. She learned he had a younger sister in Denver, parents long deceased, and a fondness for apple pie. He discovered her love of poetry, her skill with watercolors, and her ability to identify wildflowers. What she couldn't tell him was the truth about why she'd come to Georgetown. Some secrets were too dangerous to share, even with a man who wore the law on his chest. Saturday arrived bright and clear. The entire town gathered in the meadow beside Clear Creek for the Founders' Day celebration. Tables groaned under the weight of food, fiddle music filled the air, and children darted about playing games. Mabel wore her best dress, pale blue with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Holloway had insisted on lending her a pretty shawl and had helped arrange her hair in a more elaborate style than usual. "Sheriff's been watching for you," Mrs. Holloway whispered when they arrived. "Don't look now, but he's over by the lemonade and he's wearing his Sunday best." Despite the instruction, Mabel couldn't help glancing in that direction. Grant stood tall among a group of men, but unlike them, he wasn't engrossed in conversation. His eyes were scanning the crowd, and when they found her, his face lit with a smile that made her heart skip. He excused himself and made his way to her side. He had indeed dressed for the occasion: clean dark trousers, a pressed white shirt, and a new-looking vest. His badge still gleamed on his chest, but it seemed more like an ornament today than a symbol of authority. "Miss Kingston," he said, "you look lovely." "Thank you, you look quite handsome yourself, Sheriff Grant," he corrected, offering his arm. "May I get you some lemonade?" The afternoon passed pleasantly. Mabel met more townspeople, cheered for the children's races, and found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. As the sun began to set, lanterns were lit, and the musicians struck up a livelier tune. "I believe you promised me a dance," Grant said, appearing at her elbow. "Did I? Or was that your ordinance speaking?" Mabel teased, surprising herself with her boldness. "Either way, I'd be mighty disappointed to miss the opportunity." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. The dance was a simple reel, nothing complicated. Grant moved with unexpected grace for such a tall man. His hand at her waist was respectful, his grip firm but gentle. "You dance well for a lawman," Mabel observed, "and you dance well for someone who claims not to dance much." The music shifted to a slower waltz. Mabel knew she should excuse herself. One dance had been the agreement, but when Grant raised an eyebrow in question, she found herself nodding. This dance brought them closer. She could smell the clean scent of soap on his skin, feel the steady strength in his arms. When she looked up, his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Mabel," he said quietly, the first time he'd used her given name, "I know you haven't been in Georgetown long, but I'd like to call on you properly if you'd permit it." Warning bells sounded in her mind. This was exactly what she'd promised herself to avoid: entanglements, attachments, vulnerabilities. "I'm not sure that would be wise," she managed to say. Disappointment flickered across his face, but he nodded. "I understand. Perhaps you'll change your mind in time." Before she could respond, a commotion broke out at the edge of the celebration. A man on horseback galloped into the clearing, his face streaked with dirt and what looked like blood. "Sheriff," he shouted. "Sheriff Owens." Grant immediately released Mabel and strode toward the newcomer. "Here, Peterson, what's happened?" "Indians hit my place," the man gasped. "Burned the barn, took my horses. They're heading south toward the canyon." Murmurs of alarm spread through the crowd. Grant's expression hardened. "How many?" "4, maybe 5, painted for war." Grant turned to his deputy who had joined them. Taylor, get 6 men with good horses and rifles. Meet me at the livery in 10 minutes. He looked back at Mabel, regret in his eyes. I'm sorry. Go, she said. It's your duty. He nodded once, then was gone, striding purposefully through the crowd that parted before him. The celebration ended abruptly, families hurrying home, doors and shutters being locked. Mrs. Holloway fretted all the way back to the boarding house. Utes, most likely, she said. Been peaceful for years, but there's always troublemakers. Not that I blame them entirely, mind you. The government's broken every treaty it ever made with them. Mabel barely slept that night, her mind filled with worry for the town, for the farmers and ranchers in outlying areas, and she finally admitted to herself for Grant. The moon rose and set, and still there was no news. Morning came, and with it some relief. Mrs. Holloway reported that word had been sent back the sheriff, and his men had tracked the raiders and recovered the stolen horses. They would return by nightfall. School continued as usual, though Mabel noticed several empty seats children whose parents had kept them home out of caution. She carried on with lessons, trying to maintain normalcy, but found her gaze repeatedly drawn to the window, watching the road into town. When the last pupil had gone, Mabel remained at her desk, reviewing lessons for the next day. The schoolhouse door opened and her heart leapt, but it was only Thomas, her oldest student, returning for a forgotten book. Miss Kingston, he said, hesitating at the door, my pa says I should walk you back to Mrs. Holloway's, on account of the Indian trouble. Mabel smiled at the boy's earnest expression. That's very gentlemanly of you, Thomas. I would appreciate the escort. They were halfway to the boarding house when hoofbeats sounded on the road. A group of riders appeared, dust-covered and weary. At their head rode Grant, his face grim beneath a layer of trail dust. When he saw Mabel, he reined in his horse. Miss Kingston, Thomas. His voice was rougher than usual, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Sheriff, Mabel replied, unable to hide her relief at seeing him unharmed. We heard you recovered Mr. Peterson's horses. And more besides, he confirmed. Renegades from no particular tribe taking advantage of tensions. They won't trouble Georgetown again. Something in his tone made Mabel wonder what exactly had transpired, but she knew better than to ask in front of Thomas. You look tired, she said instead. A ghost of his usual smile touched his lips. Nothing a hot meal and a few hours' sleep won't cure. He touched the brim of his hat. If you'll excuse me, I need to report to the mayor. As he rode away, Thomas looked up at Mabel with the directness of youth. Sheriff Owens sure seems sweet on you, Miss Kingston. Mabel felt heat rise to her cheeks. Thomas, that's hardly an appropriate observation. Sorry, madam. But everyone in town's talking about it. My ma says it's about time the sheriff found himself a good woman. The following days fell into a rhythm. Grant resumed escorting Mabel to school each morning, though their conversations were more reserved than before. She sensed he was respecting her reluctance, waiting for her to indicate any change of heart regarding his courtship. The problem was, her heart was changing despite all her efforts to guard it. She found herself looking forward to their morning walks, making excuses to linger in conversation. When their hands accidentally brushed one morning as he helped her up the schoolhouse steps, the jolt of awareness that shot through her was impossible to ignore. 2 weeks after the Founders' Day dance, a letter arrived for Mabel. The handwriting on the envelope made her blood run cold. Special delivery, Mrs. Holloway said cheerfully, handing it to her at breakfast. All the way from St. Louis. Do you have family there, dear? An acquaintance, Mabel managed to say, tucking the letter into her pocket without opening it. Thank you. She waited until she was alone in the schoolhouse to break the seal with trembling fingers. My dearest Mabel. The letter began in a flowing hand she knew all too well. Did you truly think you could hide from me forever? Your father's debt remains unpaid, and as we agreed, you are the collateral. I have been most patient, but that patience is at an end. I know where you are. I will come for you. Your devoted fiancé, Victor. The paper slipped from Mabel's fingers. She had been a fool to think she could escape, to think she could build a new life. Victor Blackstone had connections everywhere. Of course, he would eventually track her down. She had never been his fiancé, never agreed to marry him. But her father, drowning in gambling debts and whiskey, had offered her as payment. Just until I get back on my feet, he'd promised, even as he signed papers that effectively sold her to the wealthy businessman. Victor had been charming at first, showering her with gifts and attention. Only later did she see the cruelty beneath the polished exterior, the possessiveness that went beyond affection into something dark and frightening. When she refused his advances, his true nature emerged. The night he struck her was the night she decided to run. Now he had found her. She had perhaps a week, maybe less, before he arrived in Georgetown. She would have to flee again, start over somewhere even more remote. The thought brought physical pain. She had come to love this town, these mountains, her pupils, Mrs. Holloway and Grant. She had been falling in love with him, she realized now, when it was too late. She managed to get through the school day, though her students noticed her distraction. After dismissing them, she sat at her desk, trying to formulate a plan. Where could she go? How much money could she scrape together? Lost in these desperate thoughts, she didn't hear the door open. Grant's voice made her start. "Mabel, are you all right?" She looked up to find him standing in the doorway, concern etched on his features. "I'm fine," she said automatically. "Just tired." He moved closer, unconvinced. "You're pale as a ghost, and your hands are shaking." Mabel clasped her hands together to still them. "Really, don't," he interrupted gently. "Don't tell me you're fine when you're clearly not. Whatever it is, maybe I can help." For a moment, Mabel was so tempted to confide in him. To tell him everything about her father's debts, Victor's claims, her flight from St. Louis. But what could Grant do? Victor was wealthy, influential. He would come with legal papers, perhaps even a corrupt marshal in his pay. And if Grant tried to interfere, Victor would not hesitate to have him removed permanently. "It's nothing that concerns you," she said, more harshly than she intended. Hurt flashed in his eyes, quickly masked. "I see." He took a step back. "Forgive my intrusion, Miss Kingston." "I'll leave you to your work." The formal address stung. Grant, but he was already at the door. "Good day, Miss Kingston." That night, Mabel packed her meager possessions. She would leave a note for Mrs. Holloway and the school board, making excuses about a family emergency. The stage to Denver left at noon the next day. From there, she could go anywhere, California, perhaps, or Oregon. Somewhere Victor would never find her. Sleep eluded her. Every creak of the boarding house, every distant sound from the street, made her tense with fear that Victor had already arrived. When dawn finally broke, she was exhausted but resolved. She went downstairs early, hoping to avoid Mrs. Holloway's perceptive gaze, but the landlady was already in the kitchen. "You're up with the birds," Mrs. Holloway observed, "and looking like you haven't slept a wink." "Sit down, I'll pour you some coffee." "Thank you, but I should get to the schoolhouse early today." Mabel edged toward the door. "I have preparations to make." Mrs. Holloway's kind eyes narrowed slightly. "Something's troubling you, dear." "I've been around long enough to recognize worry when I see it." Mabel hesitated, torn between her natural reserve and the genuine affection she felt for the older woman. "It's complicated," she finally said. "Most troubles are, but sharing the burden sometimes makes it lighter." Before Mabel could respond, a knock sounded at the front door. Mrs. Holloway excused herself to answer it, returning moments later with a grave expression. "It's Sheriff Owens," she said. "He says he needs to speak with you urgently." Mabel's heart sank. Had Victor already arrived? Had he gone to the sheriff with his false claims? Grant stood in the parlor, hat in hand. His expression was unreadable as Mabel entered. "Miss Kingston," he said formally, "I apologize for the early hour, but a matter has come to my attention that concerns you." "What matter?" Mabel asked, her mouth dry. "A telegram arrived late yesterday from St. Louis. A man named Victor Blackstone inquired if you were residing in Georgetown. He claimed to be your fiancé." Mabel felt the blood drain from her face. "He is not my fiancé," she managed to say. Grant's eyes sharpened. "That's what I thought. The telegraph operator brought the message to me because something didn't seem right. This Blackstone said he was coming to collect you, as if you were property." "I need to leave," Mabel said, panic rising in her throat. "Today." "Running won't solve the problem," Grant said quietly. "Tell me what's going on, Mabel. Let me help you." "You can't help. No one can." "Try me." He stepped closer, his voice dropping so Mrs. Holloway, hovering in the doorway, couldn't hear. "Whatever trouble you're in, whatever this man wants from you, you don't have to face it alone." Something in his steady gaze, the quiet strength of his presence, broke through Mabel's resolve. In halting words, she told him everything: her father's gambling, the unpaid debts, Victor's claim on her as collateral, his threats when she refused him, her desperate flight. When she finished, Grant's expression was thunderous. No court in the land would uphold such an agreement. You can't sell a person not since the war ended slavery. Victor has money and influence, Mabel said, and my father signed papers. Papers that have no legal standing. Grant reached out, hesitated, then gently took her hand. Mabel, I won't let this man take you anywhere against your will. That's not how the law works, not in my jurisdiction. You don't understand what he's capable of, and he doesn't understand what I'm capable of. A ghost of a smile touched Grant's lips. I wasn't always a lawman. I learned a few things riding with the cavalry that might surprise this Victor Blackstone. For the first time since receiving the letter, Mabel felt a flicker of hope. What do you suggest? Go about your day as usual. Teach your class. I'll make arrangements. He squeezed her hand. Trust me, Mabel, please. She looked into his eyes, clear, steady, determined, and found herself nodding. All right, I trust you. The school day crawled by. Mabel forced herself to focus on her pupils, but her mind kept returning to what might be happening in town. Would Victor arrive today? What had Grant planned? As the final bell rang and the children gathered their things, Mabel heard a commotion outside. Her heart stuttered when she recognized a voice, cultured, commanding with the faintest trace of a southern drawl. Miss Kingston is engaged to be my wife, Victor was saying to someone. I've come to bring her home. Mabel moved to the window. Victor Blackstone stood in front of the schoolhouse, immaculate as always in an expensive suit, his dark hair slicked back. Facing him, shoulders relaxed but stance unmistakably ready, was Grant. Miss Kingston teaches here, Grant was saying, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of steel. She's not engaged to anyone, and she's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go. Victor's handsome face twisted with annoyance. This is a private matter, Sheriff. I have documentation that has no legal standing, Grant interrupted. You can't own a person, Mr. Blackstone, no matter what papers her drunkard of a father signed. Victor's expression darkened. I see she's been filling your head with lies. Mabel is given to flights of fancy. She needs guidance, protection. The only thing Miss Kingston needs protection from, by my reckoning, is you. The children were watching the confrontation with wide eyes. Mabel quickly ushered them to the back door. Go straight home, all of you, quickly now. When the last child had gone, Mabel took a deep breath and stepped onto the schoolhouse porch. Victor's eyes immediately locked onto her. Mabel, my dear, he said, his voice honey-sweet but his eyes cold. I've come to take you home. Your poor father is beside himself with worry. My father sold me to cover his gambling debts, Mabel replied, her voice stronger than she felt. I am not your property, Victor. I never agreed to marry you. Now, darling, you're confused. She's not confused, Grant cut in. And she's not going anywhere with you. Victor's face hardened. I don't know what she's promised you, Sheriff, but Mabel belongs to me. I paid good money. That's enough, Grant said, his hand shifting slightly closer to his holstered revolver. Miss Kingston is a resident of Georgetown now, under my protection. I suggest you get back on that fancy horse of yours and ride out of town. For a moment, tension crackled between the two men. Then Victor smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. Very well, but this isn't over. He looked at Mabel. I'll be staying at the hotel. When you're ready to be reasonable, you know where to find me. As Victor strode away, Mabel sagged against the schoolhouse door. Grant was immediately at her side. Are you all right? He asked, concern evident in his voice. He won't give up, Mabel said. You don't know him like I do. He'll find a way, bribe someone, create false charges, anything to get what he wants. Let him try. Grant's jaw was set, determination in every line of his body. Mabel, I meant what I said. You're under my protection now, not because you're my property, because you're. He hesitated, then finished softly, because you matter to me, a great deal. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Grant, you don't have to say anything, he interrupted gently. Just know that I'll keep you safe, I promise. That evening, news spread through Georgetown like wildfire. The Eastern gentleman claiming to be Miss Kingston's fiancé had offered a substantial reward to anyone who would help persuade her to return with him. So far, no one had taken him up on the offer. Grant arranged for Deputy Taylor to keep watch on the boarding house while he himself patrolled the town. Mabel barely slept, listening for every sound, jumping at every creak of the old house. Morning came without incident. Grant escorted Mabel to the schoolhouse as usual, but his manner was more alert, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "Victor's still at the hotel," he told her. "He's been asking questions around town, trying to find someone willing to side with him against me. So far, no takers." "He won't give up," Mabel said again. "Victor never gives up when he wants something." Grant's expression hardened. "Neither do I." The day passed tensely. Parents came to collect their younger children rather than letting them walk home alone. Word had spread that there might be trouble, and no one wanted their children caught in the middle. As Mabel was preparing to leave for the day, the schoolhouse door opened. Victor stood there, looking urbane and dangerous in his fine clothes. "Mabel, my dear," he said smoothly. "I think it's time we had a private conversation, don't you?" Mabel backed away, her heart hammering. "There's nothing to discuss, Victor. Please leave." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I've been patient, too patient, perhaps. Your father's debts increase every day you're not fulfilling your end of our arrangement." "My father's debts are not my responsibility," Mabel said, trying to keep her voice steady, "and I never agreed to be sold to cover them." Victor's face darkened. "You ungrateful," he moved toward her, grabbing her arm roughly. "You're coming with me now. I've had enough of this farce. Take your hands off her." Grant's voice cut through the room like a whip. He stood in the back doorway, his revolver drawn. "Now." Victor's grip tightened painfully on Mabel's arm. "This doesn't concern you, Sheriff. This woman is coming back to St. Louis with me one way or another." "That's where you're wrong," Grant said, his voice deadly calm. "Let her go, last warning." For a tense moment, Victor hesitated. Then, with a snarl, he shoved Mabel aside and reached inside his jacket. The glint of metal revealed a small derringer. Grant moved with the speed of a mountain lion. Before Victor could aim, Grant had crossed the room and struck the man's arm with his revolver. The derringer clattered to the floor. Victor lunged for it, but Grant was faster, kicking the small gun away and pressing the barrel of his Colt against Victor's chest. "Give me a reason," Grant said softly. "Please." Victor, his face contorted with rage, looked from Grant to Mabel and back again. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have friends in Denver, friends in high places, and I have a jail cell with your name on it," Grant interrupted. "Attempted kidnapping, assault, pulling a weapon on a lawman, that's enough to keep you locked up for years, Mr. Blackstone." Something in Grant's tone, or perhaps the steady pressure of the revolver against his ribs, finally seemed to penetrate Victor's arrogance. He stepped back, hands raised slightly. "This isn't over," he said, his voice cold. "Yes, it is," Grant replied. "You're leaving Georgetown today. You won't contact Miss Kingston again. You won't come back. If you do, I'll be waiting." Victor's eyes darted to Mabel. "Your father will pay for this betrayal." "My father made his choices," Mabel said. "I've made mine." Grant escorted Victor from the schoolhouse at gunpoint. Word spread quickly through town. By nightfall, everyone knew that Sheriff Owens had run the Eastern dandy out of Georgetown for trying to force himself on the schoolteacher. "You should probably know," Grant told Mabel that evening as they sat on Mrs. Holloway's porch. "I've telegraphed the marshal in Denver. Blackstone may have friends in high places, but so do I. The marshal will make sure he gets on a train heading east." Relief washed over Mabel. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for what you've done." Grant looked at her, his eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. "You don't need to repay me, Mabel. I did it because," he paused, swallowed. "Because I care for you, more than I should, perhaps." Her heart skipped. "Grant, you don't have to say anything," he hurried on. "I know this isn't the right time. You've been through an ordeal. But when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd still like to court you properly." Mabel studied his face, the strong lines, the honest eyes, the slight nervousness in his expression that made him seem suddenly younger. This man had faced down a threat without hesitation, had protected her when she thought herself beyond help. Yet here he was, uncertain of her response. "I think," she said carefully, that I'd like that very much. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun emerging from clouds. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle. Really, really, she smiled back, feeling lighter than she had in months. But I should warn you, I have a troublesome past. And I have a checkered history, he countered. Seems to me we're well matched. They sat together as twilight deepened around them, talking of small things, beginning to build something new and fragile and hopeful between them. Spring turned to summer, and Georgetown bloomed. Wild roses climbed over fences, columbines dotted the mountainsides, and Mabel found herself smiling more often than not. Grant courted her with an old-fashioned respect that touched her deeply, escorting her to church socials, bringing wildflower bouquets to the schoolhouse, taking her on Sunday afternoon rides into the mountains. By mid-July, when he asked permission to kiss her for the first time, it felt both inevitable and extraordinary. His lips were warm and gentle on hers, his hands respectful at her waist. When he pulled back, the look in his eyes made her feel precious beyond measure. "I'm falling in love with you, Mabel Kingston," he said softly. "I think I've already fallen, Grant Owens," she replied. Life settled into a sweet rhythm. The terror of Victor's appearance faded gradually, though Mabel sometimes still woke in the night, heart pounding from nightmares. On those occasions, she would remind herself that she was safe, that Grant had kept his promise to protect her, that she was building a life of her own choosing. August brought news that made that safety seem less certain. A telegram arrived for Grant from the marshal in Denver. "Blackstone released from custody," it read. "Charges dropped by higher authority, heading your direction with companions. Exercise caution." Grant's expression was grim as he showed the telegram to Mabel. They sat in his small office at the jailhouse, the afternoon sun slanting through dusty windows. "What does it mean?" Mabel asked, though she feared she already knew. "It means Blackstone has powerful friends, just as he claimed, and he's not giving up." Grant ran a hand through his hair. "I need to prepare the town. If he's bringing men with him, there could be trouble." "Because of me," Mabel said, guilt washing over her. "I've brought this danger to Georgetown." Grant took her hands in his. "No, Blackstone is bringing this danger, not you, never you." "What should we do?" Grant considered for a moment. "I could send you to Denver or even further, keep you safe while I deal with Blackstone." The thought of leaving, of being separated from Grant, from the town and people she'd come to love, made Mabel's chest ache. "No, I won't run again. This is my home now." Pride flashed in Grant's eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that." He squeezed her hands. "We'll face this together then, but I want you to stay at Mrs. Holloway's, keep the doors locked. I'll assign Deputy Taylor to watch the house." "And what will you do?" "What I always do," Grant said simply. "Uphold the law and protect this town. Blackstone may have friends in high places, but out here, money and connections mean less than a man's word and his actions. Georgetown stands behind you, Mabel, behind us." Word spread quickly. The town that had welcomed Mabel now rallied around her. Men volunteered to join Grant's hastily organized militia. Women brought food to the jailhouse and offered Mabel reassurances. Even the children seemed to sense the tension, clustering protectively around their teacher. 2 days later, a rider brought news that Victor Blackstone and 6 men were camped at the edge of Silver Cliff Canyon, just a few miles south of Georgetown. They were well armed and asking questions about the best way into town. Grant called a meeting at the church. Nearly every adult in Georgetown attended, faces serious as he outlined the situation. "I won't ask anyone to risk their lives," he concluded. "This is my fight as the law in this county, but I won't turn away help either." "It's our fight too," Mr. Peterson said, the same rancher whose horses had been stolen months earlier. "Miss Kingston's one of us now, and nobody threatens our own." Murmurs of agreement filled the church. One by one, men stepped forward to volunteer. By the end of the meeting, Grant had a force of 20 reliable men, each with his own rifle and determination to protect their town. "We'll ride out tomorrow at dawn," Grant decided. "Meet Blackstone and his men before they reach Georgetown. I want to settle this away from town, where no innocent people might be caught in the crossfire." That night after the meeting, Grant walked Mabel back to Mrs. Holloway's. The summer air was warm, heavy with the scent of pine and wildflowers. Stars blazed overhead in a velvet sky, the mountains dark silhouettes against their brightness. "I wish there was another way," Mabel said softly. "So do I." Grant's voice was equally quiet. "But some men only understand one language force. Blackstone has made his choice." They stopped at the gate to Mrs. Holloway's garden. Grant took both of Mabel's hands in his expression solemn in the moonlight. "Mabel, there's something I need to tell you before tomorrow." Her heart quickened. "What is it?" "I love you." The words were simple, direct, like the man himself. "I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you. If something happens tomorrow, don't," she interrupted, pressing her fingers to his lips. "Don't speak of that." He caught her hand, kissed her palm. "I have to. If something happens to me, I want you to know that loving you has been the greatest joy of my life." Tears sprang to Mabel's eyes. "Grant, and I want you to promise me something," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Promise you won't blame yourself whatever happens. Promise you'll stay in Georgetown, keep teaching, keep building the life you deserve." "I can't promise that," she whispered. "Not without you." He pulled her close then, his arms strong around her. "Stubborn woman," he murmured against her hair, but there was tenderness in his voice. When he kissed her this time, there was an urgency that hadn't been there before, a desperation. A need to memorize the feel of her lips against his, the way she fit perfectly in his arms. Mabel kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all her fear and love and hope into the moment. When they finally parted, both breathless, Grant rested his forehead against hers. "I should go. Dawn comes early. Be careful tomorrow," Mabel said. "Please?" "I will." He kissed her once more, softly. "Lock the doors, stay with Mrs. Holloway. I'll come back to you as soon as I can." Mabel watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually swallowed by the darkness. A premonition of loss gripped her so strongly that she nearly called him back. Instead, she pressed her fingers to her lips, still warm from his kiss, and whispered a prayer into the night. Dawn broke clear and bright over Georgetown. From Mrs. Holloway's window, Mabel watched Grant and his men gather in the main street. 20 strong, they checked weapons, mounted horses, exchanged quiet words. Grant sat tall in the saddle, his face set with determination, the silver star on his chest catching the early light. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up toward her window. Their eyes met across the distance. He touched his hat in a gesture that carried a world of meaning, then turned his horse and led his men out of town. The day stretched endlessly. Mabel tried to occupy herself with lesson plans for the coming school term, but her mind refused to focus. Mrs. Holloway kept a steady stream of chatter going, clearly trying to distract them both, but her eyes frequently darted to the window. By mid-afternoon, tension had spread throughout Georgetown. Women gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed voices. Children were kept close to home. Men who hadn't ridden out with Grant stood watch at the edges of town, rifles at the ready. The first gunshots came just before sunset, distant pops echoing from the direction of Silvercliff Canyon. Mabel froze, her hand clutching the pencil she'd been writing with so tightly that it snapped. "Dear Lord," Mrs. Holloway whispered, crossing herself. It started. More shots followed, too many to count. Then silence, more ominous than the gunfire. Minutes stretched to an hour. The sun sank behind the mountains, painting the sky in fiery hues. Unable to bear the waiting any longer, Mabel went to the porch. Other townsfolk had emerged as well, all eyes turned toward the south road. The twilight deepened. Stars appeared, still no word, no riders returning. Then, just as the last light faded from the sky, movement on the road. Figures on horseback moving slowly. A murmur went through the gathered crowd. Mabel strained to see in the gathering darkness. Were there 20 riders returning? Fewer. Had Victor prevailed, the lead rider came into clearer view and Mabel's heart leapt. Even in the dim light, she recognized Grant's broad shoulders, the set of his head. He was alive. But as the group drew closer, she saw that many men were wounded, some slumped in their saddles. Others supported injured comrades. Grant rode directly to Mrs. Holloway's house. As he dismounted, Mabel saw with horror the dark stain spreading across his left shoulder. "Grant," she rushed down the steps to meet him. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he said, though his face was pale beneath the trail dust. "Just a graze." "What happened? Blackstone is dead." Grant's voice was flat. "He wouldn't back down, drew on me when I tried to arrest him. His men surrendered after that, except two who tried to make a stand. They didn't survive either. Relief and sorrow mingled in Mabel's heart. No matter what Victor had done, death seemed a harsh payment. Yet the threat was over. Georgetown was safe. Grant was alive. "Come inside," she said, taking his arm. "Let me tend that wound." In Mrs. Holloway's kitchen, Mabel gently cleaned the bullet graze on Grant's shoulder. It was ugly but not deep another inch to the right, though, and the outcome might have been very different. The thought made her hands tremble. "Steady," Grant murmured, covering her hand with his. "I'm all right, Mabel. We all came through, more or less." Peterson took a bullet in the leg, and Taylor's got a nasty cut from a ricochet, but everyone's alive. And Blackstone's men, the 4 who surrendered, are in the jail. They'll stand trial in Denver for attempted murder of a lawman. Most are hired guns they'll talk to save their own skins. Grant winced slightly as Mabel applied iodine to his wound. "It's over, Mabel, truly over." She finished bandaging his shoulder in silence, her mind working through all that had happened, all that might have happened. When she was done, she stepped back, suddenly overcome with emotion. "I could have lost you," she whispered. Grant stood, reaching for her with his good arm. "But you didn't. If you had died because of me, not because of you," he corrected firmly. "For you, there's a difference." He drew her closer. "And I'd do it again in a heartbeat." "That's what love is, Mabel, being willing to stand between danger and the person you love." Tears spilled down Mabel's cheeks. "I love you so much." "I know," he said, his lips curving in a tired smile. "I'm a lucky man." He hesitated, then added, "Lucky enough that I'm hoping you might consider becoming my wife." Mabel's breath caught. "Grant, I don't have a ring yet," he hurried on. "And I know this isn't the most romantic proposal, what with me bleeding on Mrs. Holloway's floor and all, but today made me realize something. Life's uncertain. When you find what matters most, you shouldn't waste time." Joy bloomed in Mabel's heart, bright and overwhelming. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." His smile was like sunrise after the darkest night. He pulled her close, his kiss a promise of all the tomorrows they would share. The canyon filled with smoke from Gunfire became a memory, a moment when everything hung in the balance, when a cowboy shielded her and waited for calm. From that chaos had come this perfect stillness, this certainty, this love. Georgetown celebrated the wedding of Sheriff Grant Owens and schoolteacher Mabel Kingston on a golden September afternoon. The entire town turned out, the church overflowing with well-wishers. Mabel wore a gown of ivory silk, sent from Denver at Mrs. Holloway's insistence. Grant, his shoulder mostly healed, looked handsome in a new black suit, his badge polished to a high shine on his chest. "I, Grant, take thee, Mabel," he said, his deep voice steady as he placed a simple gold band on her finger. His eyes never left hers as he spoke the traditional vows, each word a sacred promise. "I, Mabel, take thee, Grant," she responded, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain her joy. As she placed a matching band on his finger, she added silently, "Thank you for waiting for calm when the storm raged around us." Reverend Peterson pronounced them husband and wife. Their first kiss as a married couple was met with cheers and applause from the assembled townsfolk. As they walked back down the aisle, Mabel caught Mrs. Holloway dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The celebration continued well into the evening. Tables were set up in the town square, laden with food contributed by every household. Lanterns and paper streamers transformed the ordinary space into something magical. The fiddler played dance tunes, and Grant claimed Mabel for the first dance, holding her close despite his still tender shoulder. "Happy, Mrs. Owens," he murmured in her ear. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. Later, as twilight deepened into night, they slipped away from the celebration to the small house Grant had purchased on the edge of town. It wasn't grand, 2 bedrooms, a cozy parlor, a kitchen with a cast iron stove, but it was theirs. Together they crossed the threshold, leaving behind the fears and dangers that had marked the beginning of their relationship. In the privacy of their bedroom, Grant's hands were gentle as he helped Mabel remove the pins from her hair, watching with wonder as it cascaded down her back. "You are so beautiful," he said softly. "Sometimes I still can't believe you chose me." "I think we chose each other," Mabel replied, reaching up to touch his face, and it's the best choice I've ever made. Their coming together was tender, passionate, a fulfillment of all the promise that had built between them over the months. Afterward, lying in Grant's arms as moonlight spilled through the window, Mabel felt a sense of peace she'd never known before. "What are you thinking?" Grant asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I never expected to find this," she admitted. "After everything with my father and Victor, I didn't think I could trust anyone again, but you changed that." He kissed her forehead. "And you changed me. I was content enough before you came to Georgetown, had my job, my friends. But I didn't realize what was missing until I saw you step down from that stagecoach." Life settled into new rhythms. Mabel continued teaching, now as Mrs. Owens. Grant remained steadfast in his duties as sheriff. Their home became a center of warmth and welcome in the community, often hosting Sunday dinners for friends or providing shelter for travelers caught by mountain storms. The first test of their new life came in November, when a letter arrived from St. Louis. Mabel recognized her father's handwriting immediately, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. "Dear Mabel," the letter began, "word has reached me of Victor Blackstone's death. While I cannot claim to mourn the man, I feel I must acknowledge my role in the troubles that befell you. The debt that drove me to such desperate measures is still unpaid, though with Blackstone gone, perhaps his associates will be less determined in their collection efforts. I write not to ask your forgiveness, which I do not deserve, but to inquire after your welfare. Are you safe? Are you well? Your loving father." Mabel sat at the kitchen table, the letter spread before her, emotions warring within her heart. Grant found her there when he came home, took one look at her face, and knelt beside her chair. "What is it?" he asked gently. She wordlessly handed him the letter. He read it quickly, his expression darkening. "What do you want to do?" The question, so simple yet so profound in its respect for her autonomy, brought tears to Mabel's eyes. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me wants to burn it and pretend it never came. Another part." "Misses your father," Grant finished for her. "Despite everything. He's the only family I have left. My mother, my brothers, they're all gone." Grant took her hands in his. "No, Mabel, I'm your family now. Georgetown is your family, but if you want to answer his letter, I'll support that. If you want to invite him here, I'll accept that too, though he and I will have words about his treatment of you." The fierceness in Grant's tone made Mabel smile despite her turmoil. "I think I'll write back," she decided. "Tell him I'm safe and happy, that I've found a good man and a good life. The rest, whether to forgive, whether to rebuild what was broken, that can wait." Grant nodded. "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." Winter came to Georgetown with a vengeance that year. Snow piled high around the houses, and the temperature dropped so low that the creek froze solid. Grant was busier than ever, dealing with stranded travelers and disputes born of cabin fever. Mabel added extra lessons on cold days to keep her pupils occupied, organizing spelling bees and recitations that drew parents and townspeople to the schoolhouse. Christmas was a joyous affair, their small house filled with friends. Mrs. Holloway contributed a magnificent plum pudding. Deputy Taylor brought a wild turkey he'd shot himself, and the children from school presented Mabel with a quilt they'd made secretly under Mrs. Peterson's guidance. That night, as they prepared for bed, Grant handed Mabel a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Merry Christmas," he said, a hint of nervousness in his smile. Inside was a delicate silver locket. When Mabel opened it, she found a tiny photograph of Grant on one side. The other was empty. "I thought," he said hesitantly, "that someday we might put a picture of our child there, if that's something you want." Mabel's heart swelled. "It's all I want," she whispered, drawing him down for a kiss. "A family with you." Spring arrived, melting the snow and bringing new life to the mountains. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and the aspens put forth tender green leaves. Mabel found herself tiring easily, certain smells suddenly nauseating. When she missed her monthly courses for the second time, she visited Doc Wilson. The news he gave her sent her floating home, her feet barely touching the ground. She prepared a special dinner, waiting impatiently for Grant to return from his rounds. When he finally arrived, hat in hand and weariness etched on his face, she could barely contain herself. "How was your day?" she asked, trying to sound casual as she set the table. Long, Grant replied, washing up at the basin. Peterson and Hawkins are feuding again over that boundary line. And the stage was late because of a mudslide on the pass. He dried his hands, finally noticing the special meal, his favorite roast beef, fresh bread, even a berry pie. "What's the occasion?" Mabel couldn't hold back any longer. "We're going to have a baby," she blurted out. "In October, Doc Wilson says." Grant froze, towel still in hand, his expression shifting from shock to wonder to joy in the span of a heartbeat. Then he was across the room, lifting Mabel in a careful embrace, his laughter mingling with hers. "A baby," he said, setting her gently on her feet. "Our baby." He laid a hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your papa can't wait to meet you." The months that followed were filled with preparations. Grant spent every spare moment building a cradle while Mabel sewed tiny garments and dreamed of the child to come. The whole town took part in the anticipation. Mrs. Holloway knitted blankets, the miners' wives organized a baby shower, and even the children at school offered suggestions for names. As summer waned and Mabel's belly grew round, she received another letter from her father. This one was different, humble, genuinely repentant. He asked if he might come to Georgetown to meet her husband and, God willing, his grandchild. After much discussion with Grant, Mabel sent a cautious invitation. 2 weeks later, Harold Kingston arrived on the stage from Denver, a shadow of the commanding figure she remembered. Grief and remorse had aged him, carved deep lines in his once handsome face. The reunion was awkward at first. Grant stood protectively at Mabel's side as her father approached their house, hat in hand. "Mabel," Harold said, his voice cracking, "you're so beautiful." His gaze dropped to her swollen belly, then back to her face. "I don't deserve to be here." "No," Mabel agreed softly, "but you're here anyway." She stepped forward, not quite embracing him but allowing him to take her hands. "Welcome to Georgetown, Father." Over the following days, a fragile reconciliation began to form. Harold was staying at the hotel, coming to their home for meals, gradually sharing the story of what had happened after Mabel fled. How Victor's death had indeed eased the pressure of the debt collectors. How he had finally faced his gambling addiction and begun to rebuild his life. How the emptiness of his house without Mabel had finally made him recognize all he had thrown away. Grant observed with cautious acceptance, neither encouraging nor discouraging the rebuilding of bridges. His primary concern was Mabel's well-being, especially as her time grew near. "Are you sure you want him here when the baby comes?" he asked one night as they lay in bed, his hand gently caressing the mound of their child. "I think so," Mabel replied after careful consideration. "He's changed, Grant, and this baby his grandchild, it might be the best thing for both of us." A new beginning. The baby had its own ideas about timing. 1 week before the expected date, in the deep of night, Mabel woke to a sharp pain and a gush of fluid. "Grant," she gasped, clutching his arm. "It's time." The next hours were a blur of pain and effort. Grant sent for Doc Wilson and Mrs. Holloway, then held Mabel's hand through each contraction, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. Harold paced anxiously in the parlor, occasionally poking his head in to ask for news. Just as dawn was breaking over the mountains after hours of labor, their son entered the world with a robust cry. Doc Wilson placed the squalling, red-faced infant on Mabel's chest. "He's perfect," Grant said, his voice thick with emotion as he counted tiny fingers and toes. "Look what we made, Mabel." Through tears of exhaustion and joy, Mabel gazed down at their child. He had a shock of dark hair like his father's, and when he briefly opened his eyes, she saw they were the same clear gray as her own. "William," she said softly. "William Harold Owens." She looked up at Grant. "If that's all right with you." Grant's smile was answer enough. He kissed her forehead, then gently touched his son's cheek. "Welcome to the world, William." Later, when Mabel had been cleaned up and was resting comfortably, Grant invited Harold in to meet his grandson. The older man approached the bed tentatively, peering down at the swaddled infant in Mabel's arms. "Would you like to hold him?" Mabel asked. Harold's eyes widened in surprise. "You'd trust me with him?" "We're family," Mabel said simply. "All of us." With trembling hands, Harold accepted his grandson, cradling him with unexpected tenderness. "Hello, William," he whispered. "I'm your grandpa, and I promise I'll do better by you than I did by your mama." Grant placed a hand on Harold's shoulder. "We all get second chances," he said quietly. "What matters is what we do with them." As autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson, life in Georgetown settled into new patterns around baby William. Harold decided to stay, renting a small cabin at the edge of town and taking odd jobs to support himself. He spent much of his free time with his grandson, clearly treasuring every moment. Mabel returned to teaching in November, bringing William with her. The older girls took turns holding him during lessons, and he became the unofficial mascot of the school. Grant expanded his sheriff's office to include a small corner with a cradle, for the days when it was Mabel's turn to have William with her. One crisp December afternoon, as the first snow of winter dusted Georgetown, Grant suggested a ride up to Silver Cliff Canyon. "Just the three of us," he said. William should see where his parents' story really began. They bundled the baby warmly and rode up into the mountains, the familiar trail now transformed by a light coating of snow. The canyon walls rose majestically around them, silent sentinels to their happiness. Grant helped Mabel dismount, then took William from her arms. "This is the place," he said, looking around at the peaceful canyon. "Right here is where I knew for certain that I would do anything to protect you, where I began to understand what you meant to me." Mabel slipped her arm around his waist, leaning her head against his shoulder as they both gazed down at their sleeping son. "From gunsmoke and danger to this," she marveled. "How far we've come. And how far we'll go together," Grant added, pressing a kiss to her temple. "This is just the beginning, Mabel, just the beginning." The sun broke through the clouds, sending shafts of golden light into the canyon. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the mountains and the warmth of her husband and child, Mabel knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home. Not in a place, but in the hearts of those she loved. The canyon that had once filled with smoke from gunfire was peaceful now, a testament to the power of love to transform even the most dangerous moments into the foundation of a beautiful life. The cowboy who had shielded her and waited for calm now stood beside her as husband and father, still her protector, but now so much more her partner, her lover, her best friend. As they rode back down to Georgetown, their future stretching before them like the endless Colorado sky, Mabel sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances, for courage in the face of fear, and for the unexpected ways that love finds us, even when we're running from it. And in the years that followed, as William grew into a strong boy with his father's sense of justice and his mother's love of learning, as the town of Georgetown prospered and changed, as their family expanded to include a daughter they named Sarah after Grant's mother, that love only deepened, a wellspring that never ran dry. The story that began in danger became one of enduring peace. The woman who had fled in fear found the courage to stand her ground, and the lawman who had taken a stand for justice discovered that the greatest courage of all was opening his heart to love. In Georgetown, Colorado, the tale of Sheriff Owens and the schoolteacher who captured his heart became something of a legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes, in the midst of the wildest storms, if we shield each other and wait for calm, we find not just safety, but our very reason for being.